It was the 23rd of July of this year when 4 men were arrested at Manchester Airport, and still no charges have been brought. But we understand that it's quite possible Reform are going to bring a private prosecution against these individuals, which I'm going to talk briefly about in this video. Obviously, I can't talk too much about the specifics of this case because it's an ongoing or it's an imminent case, and therefore this is going to be limited to what I can talk about, so please do bear that in mind. Now, a little bit of credit first of all. This is according to journalist Glenn Owen, writing for today's Mail on Sunday, which I found out about thanks to the Magistrate's blog, which I'll link in the description below. Fantastic read, go and check out the website. And if you do like some objective input to the news and what's going on, please do consider subscribing to the channel. I am not the mainstream media, I have no outside editorial control. It is just my raw views for you as a practicing barrister, as I see it, whether that's left, right, or somewhere in the middle. So please do subscribe and I'd appreciate it. But today marks 118 days inclusive, or over 4 months since these men were arrested, and no charges have yet been brought. By the CPS, that is. Now, you remember I did a video some time ago where Reform did a press conference and wrote a letter to the Home Secretary to say that they would consider instigating criminal private prosecutions against these men if the CPS did not do so. Now, I would expect the CPS to have made a decision by now, whatever that decision might be. Obviously, I can't comment on that specifically, but I can only say that they must still be considering something. Otherwise, they would have made public a decision one way or another, because they do publicise their decisions one way or another. They do have a public-facing website with a news section, and they make the public aware of what's going on. Greater Manchester Police were quick to say that it's not their fault because they've passed the file to the CPS. This is not to lay blame at the CPS, you understand, on my part. This is just the police saying, well, we've done our bit, we've gathered the evidence, we've handed the file, a comprehensive file, they said, to the CPS, and they are considering the decision. Now, Reform have said that they are considering their own private prosecution. So how does that work, and is that really a thing? Because a few people have been a bit confused about that as to how anyone other than the CPS, which is our state prosecutorial body, can bring a private prosecution. And indeed, this is an increasing thing, actually, in recent years, because of, well, for one, a lack of resources for the state to prosecute certain offences and to get things through the system and brought to justice a lot more efficiently. Individuals and companies are bringing their own private prosecutions, notably the likes of Royal Mail and other courier services for things such as internal espionage, theft of packages, or other kinds of fraud and things like that. These are on the rise in terms of private prosecutions. The RSPCA brings private prosecutions, and an increasing number of private organisations and even individuals bring their own private prosecution. And this is afforded in law under statutory legislation under the Prosecution of Offences Act 1985. Section 6, to be specific, which provides that prosecutions instituted and conducted otherwise than by the service, otherwise than by the Crown Prosecution Service. Subsection 1, subject to subsection 2, which I'll come back to in a minute, nothing in this part shall preclude any person from instituting any criminal proceedings or conducting any criminal proceedings, which again I'll come back to which the director's duty, as in the Director of Public Prosecutions, duty to take over the conduct of proceedings does not apply. Now, briefly explaining that bit, there are certain proceedings where the DPP has the duty to take over certain proceedings, and there are certain proceedings that require the permission of the DPP to bring in the first place, but otherwise nothing in this part of this legislation precludes any individual or any company from bringing their own private prosecution. But all of this subject to subsection 2, and this is the bit that might raise a few eyebrows. Subsection 2 says where criminal proceedings are instituted in circumstances in which the director is not under a duty to take over the conduct. In other words, this is any sort of offence where somebody or a company can bring a prosecution, for example, a dishonesty offence of theft or fraud or so on. In cases like that, where one can bring a private prosecution, this provides that he, the Director of Public Prosecutions, may nevertheless do so at any stage. Now, what that means is if Reform or anybody did bring a private prosecution against these men or anyone else, the Director of Public Prosecutions, i.e. the CPS, can take over this case at any stage, and they can either continue it or they can shut it down. But dare I say, if Reform, and these are hypotheticals, but if Reform did bring a private prosecution against any or all of these 4 men, and then if the CPS took over that case, and then if the CPS brought that case to an end, I suspect that a lot of people would have a lot to say about that. But that's all I can say about that, because otherwise I'd be trampling into things that I obviously cannot say. And this is broadly twofold. Firstly, contempt of court, and secondly, sub judice, which I'll come back to in a minute. Contempt of court could be commenting on an ongoing investigation, which may lead to charges, which obviously in this case haven't yet been brought, but it's an ongoing investigation which there may be charges brought or a private prosecution brought. And so commenting on that in any way that could prejudice those proceedings could amount to contempt of court. Now, there have to be a serious risk of prejudicing those proceedings, so commenting on the facts of what's happened, etc., wouldn't amount to that. But if you were to make a big, strong, bold statement as to what you think about guilt and so on, then obviously that might have a different effect. Sub judice, on the other hand, meaning under a judge, is from the point of charge or from the point that a summons has been issued. And you might recall that that was recently brought up in Parliament with regard to the Southport case. And so either way, my comments in this video must remain neutral and factual as to what has actually happened, rather than passing my opinions. And so I am somewhat limited in what I can say here. But what I can comment on is what has actually and factually happened, and what is reported likely to happen, such as Reform and its MPs saying that they are going to bring a private prosecution according to this letter to the Home Secretary. Now, as I say, there are few criminal prosecutions that do require permission before you can bring them. I understand those are perjury, things such as terrorism, and offences, for example, under the Official Secrets Act. We're not too troubled with those in this video. But in the usual run of things for standard ordinary offences, which include assault, and in this case, I understand that 2 of these men were arrested on suspicion of assault, assault of emergency worker, affray, and obstructing police, and 2 further men were also arrested on suspicion of affray and assault of emergency worker. Now, certainly the emergency worker bit would be an either way offence, meaning it could go into the Magistrates Court or the Crown Court, and thus is not subject to a 6-month time limit. But the procedure is actually relatively straightforward. You submit an application for summons in writing with a description of the alleged offence, sufficient details that you say show that the offence has been committed, any relevant evidence or witness statements or anything else that's going to support those allegations. It doesn't have to be absolutely everything at that stage. It just has to be enough so that you can submit that in writing, an application for summons, which a summons is calling the person to court to answer those charges if they are agreed, and you submit that to the Magistrates Court. This used to be referred to as laying an information in old terms, but it is relatively straightforward these days, and also it is a relatively low bar. Again, reading from the Magistrates blog, I'll link this in the description below, which you can go and take a look as well. It's not a very high bar to achieve, and if the individual is correctly identified and the criminal allegations are sufficiently particularised, then it is likely that that will proceed to a summons. And that individual or those individuals together would then be summoned to appear in court and answer to those charges. Now, apparently there is no dispute that the 2 brothers were involved in this altercation, and they've then obviously since appeared in several press conferences, which you've probably seen, and in those interviews they ostensibly accuse the officers in question of acting with unlawful force. All of which would come out if indeed this did proceed to a criminal prosecution. But again, to come full circle, according to Glenn Owen, which I read from the Magistrates blog, Nigel Farage MP, leader of Reform, will today, if he hasn't done already by the time this video goes out, will announce the commencement of a private prosecution against the brothers accused of this incident in Manchester Airport. And so that, I hope, gives you a broad overview of private prosecutions, what might happen, that it could absolutely happen if that's what they choose to do. And I do hope you understand that there's only a limited amount I can say about this. I must keep to facts and explain what is actually happening rather than cast any views, and certainly without making any statements of fact as to what happened. But either way, I hope that's interesting. Please do hit the like button to this video. I'll give you time to do that now. That helps my channel grow. Hit the subscribe button down below, the notification bell to get new videos. And so have a great Sunday, and thank you for watching.